Okay, let's unpack this. I want you to picture something for a second.
Mm.
Imagine that your history, your very evolution, isn't just about Homo sapiens doing our own thing, but is fundamentally woven into the lives of other creatures, like deep down in your bones and theirs. We're not talking about just having pets. We're talking about the absolute bedrock of human existence, a wild, complex, often messy, and honestly mind-blowing evolutionary dance that goes way, way deeper than most of us ever stop to consider.
It's true. We often put ourselves on this pedestal, separate from the animal kingdom, thinking we're just the dominant species dictating terms. But the reality is, for hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions of years, our paths have been tangled up with other species, not just influenced by them, but actively reciprocally shaping each other's genetics, behavior, and even culture. It's been a constant feedback loop.
Absolutely, and that tangled up story, that's what this deep dive is all about. We've cracked open a stack of material research, articles, notes to pull out the essential insights. The mission is simple. Give you the shortcut, the aha, moments that hit you like a 2x4, so you're damn well informed about this incredible shared journey without getting lost in a mountain of dense, complex crap.
Yeah, and the material we've got here covers a lot of ground. The theoretical underpinnings of this evolutionary dance delves into specific historical partnerships, like our ancient bonds with dogs and the revolutionary impact of livestock, and even unearths some truly unexpected animal connections that really challenge our basic assumptions about these relationships.
And trust me, this isn't some dry, dusty academic lecture you have to sit through.
Right.
We're going to unpack this with the energy and surprise it deserves, and just enough straight talk to keep it real. So, buckle up. Let's plunge into the wild ride of human-animal coevolution.
All right, let's start at the beginning then. Before we can really appreciate the human story, we need to get a handle on what coevolution actually means. At its most fundamental level, it's the process where two or more species exert selective pressures on each other, leading to reciprocal evolutionary changes. Think of it as partners in a long-term relationship, constantly influencing and changing each other over generations.
So it's not just one species adapting to another, it's definitely a two-way street.
Precisely. It's that dynamic back-and-forth interaction that defines it. One species evolves a trait, right? And that trait changes the environment or selective pressures for the other species. Then the second species evolves in response, and that change, in turn, creates a new pressure on the first species. It's an ongoing, interconnected feedback loop.
And these changes tend to be adaptive, right? Helping both species survive or reproduce better, at least within the context of that specific interaction.
That's the crucial part, yeah. The adaptations are usually specific to that partnership or interaction. They evolve for each other, fitting together in ways that enhance their ability to thrive together or, to succeed in the face of the other, whether that's predator-prey, parasite-host, or something mutually beneficial.
It's pretty incredible to think about how Darwin was hinting at this, even if he didn't have the exact term. His work on things like orchids and their specific pollinators, where the shape of the flower seemed perfectly matched to the insect's mouth parts, that was observing this reciprocal shaping in action, wasn't it?
Absolutely. Darwin's observations laid the intellectual groundwork. He saw these incredibly specialized relationships and inferred that they must have evolved in lockstep. The field really blossomed later, with the formal concept of coevolution expanding on that foundational idea.
And it's not always a simple pair of species, is it? It can get a lot more complex than just two dance partners.
You got it. Coevolution isn't restricted to just a pair. You can have what's called diffuse or multi-species coevolution, where a whole group of species evolves in response to another group. Imagine a whole suite of plant defenses evolving in response to a community of herbivores, and the herbivores evolving counter-adaptations. The whole damn system is intertwined and evolving together.
Okay, so that's the basic biological concept. But the material we've looked at makes it clear that when humans enter the picture, things get, well, profoundly more complicated and fascinating.
Yeah.
Because our evolution isn't just genetic, is it?
This is where the human story diverges in a really big way. A more contemporary understanding recognizes that coevolution isn't solely about genes acting on genes. It includes other forms of inheritance and interaction, particularly cultural transmission. Human culture becomes this incredibly potent, dynamic force.
The culture piece. That's like adding rocket fuel to the coevolutionary engine.
Yeah.
Our practices, our knowledge, our technology. That becomes a selective pressure on other species.
Exactly. Human culture, whether it's farming techniques, hunting strategies, building settlements, or even developing social norms around animals, acts as a powerful selective force on animal populations. Animals that are better able to adapt to the environment we create or the pressures we impose are the ones that succeed.
And it's definitely not just a one-way street. The animal's traits, their behaviors, they also shape our culture.
Absolutely. This creates what's known as a gene culture co-evolutionary feedback loop. Our cultural practices impose selection on animals, favoring certain traits. Animals with those traits thrive alongside us, and their presence, their behaviors, their usefulness then influences our culture, maybe leading to new practices, new technologies, and potentially even new selective pressures on us, genetically or culturally. It's a constant, dynamic interplay.
And this gene culture loop, compared to just straight genetic evolution, is it faster? Like way faster?
Often, significantly faster, yeah. Cultural evolution, the transmission of knowledge and practices, can occur within a single generation, or even faster. We can invent a new tool, learn a new technique, or change a behavior far more quickly than a population can accumulate and spread a beneficial genetic mutation. This speed and flexibility make human-animal relationships exceptionally dynamic and powerful drivers of change.
Give us a prime example of this gene culture loop from the material, something that really shows how deeply entwined it gets.
Okay, one of the most compelling examples is the story of dairying and lactase persistence in humans. The cultural practice of domesticating animals like cattle, goats, and sheep for their milk, and then consuming that milk into adulthood created a completely novel environment for human populations.
So the culture of milking animals started it all.
Right. That cultural innovation created a strong selective pressure favoring a specific genetic trait in humans, lactase persistence. This is the ability to continue producing the enzyme lactase, which digests milk sugar, throughout adulthood. For most mammals, including our ancestral human populations, lactase production shuts down after weaning.
So suddenly, in these dairying cultures, being able to drink milk without getting sick was a huge advantage, like a game changer.
A massive advantage. Milk is a high-calorie, nutrient-rich food source, especially critical when other food might be scarce or seasonal. Individuals with the genetic mutation allowing lactase persistence gained a significant nutritional and survival edge in these populations. This led to rapid positive selection for those lactase persistence genes.
So the culture of drinking milk selected for the gene that lets you drink milk. It's almost circular, but it makes perfect sense when you think about it.
Exactly. And then the fact that more and more people in the population could successfully consume milk reinforced the cultural practice of dairying. It became an even more successful and central part of their subsistence strategy. It's a beautiful, clear example of a positive feedback loop where a cultural change drove a significant genetic change in humans, which then further entrenched the cultural practice. This whole damn process is complex and bidirectional.
Okay, so we've got coevolution as this reciprocal dance. And a big part of that can be mutualism, where both partners actually get something good out of it, right?
Exactly. Mutualism is a major form of coevolution, where both species involved experience a net benefit from the interaction. Often, it's the coevolutionary process itself that drives the formation and refinement of these partnerships.
Like the classic examples in nature, plants and pollinators.
Perfect example. Plants get their pollen moved around, ensuring reproduction. Pollinators get food in the form of nectar or pollen itself. Or think about acacia trees and the ants that live on them. The ants get shelter and food. The tree gets ferocious defense against herbivores. It's a straightforward exchange of benefits.
And this applies directly to many human-animal stories.
Absolutely. Many of the relationships we're talking about, especially with domestication, fit the mutualism model, at least initially or broadly. Take dogs again. Early dogs got food and warmth from humans. Humans got help with hunting and protection. Domestication often acts to enhance these mutual benefits, making the partnership even tighter.
So the pursuit of these reciprocal advantages is what forges these really strong, lasting evolutionary connections.
Precisely. It creates powerful bonds. And this idea connects back to what Ehrlich and Raven proposed for plants and butterflies, that forming diverse mutualisms can be a major force driving diversification. Forming different partnerships with different animals, dogs for hunting, cattle for food, horses for transport, could have spurred diversification in both human cultural practices and in the traits of the animals themselves.
Right. Okay, so coevolution is this reciprocal dance. Mutualism is where both partners benefit. And the gene culture loop makes the human part uniquely powerful and fast. All of this activity happens in a particular space, right? The material calls it the human-animal interface.
That's right. This interface isn't just a physical boundary, it's an intricate, dynamic, and evolving zone where human and animal lives intersect. It is the absolute crucible where this coevolution has been forged, starting way back with the earliest Homo sapiens interactions with other species.
So this isn't some recent development. This is ancient, deep history we're talking about.
Profoundly historical. It's been absolutely integral to the development of human societies and even our biological selves. But the material points out that in the modern era, this interface has been radically transformed.
How has it changed? What's different now?
Think about it. The intensification of animal domestication, turning local breeds into globalized, hyper-specialized production machines, the massive scale of modern agriculture, rapid urbanization, bringing humans and certain animal species into incredibly dense, novel environments, industrialization, changing landscapes and interactions, all of this has made the human-animal interface globally connected, incredibly complex, and multifaceted.
And these modern changes aren't static. They're still creating new pressures, new selective environments. This stuff is still happening.
Precisely. These ongoing transformations generate new selective pressures for both humans and animals. Our domesticates continue to evolve rapidly under intense artificial selection, while wild and peri-domesticated animals adapt to the novel environments we create in cities and agricultural landscapes. It shows that these ancient partnerships are far from historical relics. They are living, adapting systems still very much in flux.
And understanding this interface, why is it so critical right now? What's the big deal?
The material emphasizes that studying this interface isn't just about historical curiosity. It's vital for understanding and tackling some of the most pressing challenges we face today, especially the dynamics of infectious diseases that jump from animals to humans, the zoonotic diseases like COVID-19, avian flu, you name it. Understanding the history and ongoing evolution of our closeness with animals is key to predicting and managing these risks.
Fascinating stuff. So with that groundwork laid, let's dive into arguably the biggest chapter of this story, the domestication game. The material frames this as perhaps the single most significant example of human-driven coevolution.
It genuinely reshaped the planet and our place on it. Domestication wasn't a single event. It was a complex, often multi-stage process spanning thousands of years, where humans, through artificial selection essentially, picking who gets to breed radically transformed wild animal species into the domesticates we know today.
And that transformation wasn't confined to the animals. It fundamentally reshaped human societies and our own evolutionary trajectory, like huge ripple effects.
Absolutely. It was a revolutionary force. But it's crucial to understand that animals didn't all get domesticated the same way. There wasn't a single manual,
Right. The material describes different pathways into this partnership. It wasn't one size fits all.
Exactly. Different initial conditions and human motivations led to distinct evolutionary trajectories for different species. The material outlines three main pathways.
Lay 'em on us. What's the first way into the human world for these animals?
The first is the commensal pathway. This often began quite passively, with wild animals being drawn to human settlements or campsites by the resources we were creating. Things like discarded food scraps, or later pests like rodents attracted to stored grain. These created new, relatively safe, ecological niches.
So the animals were kind of self-selecting, showing up because we were convenient, almost inviting themselves to the party.
In a way, yes. Animals that were naturally bolder, less fearful of humans, were better able to exploit these human-generated resources, gained an advantage. Over generations, this tolerance and proximity could deepen into a relationship that humans eventually began to manage more actively. It had an element of the animal initiating contact, drawn by opportunity.
And the classic examples here are dogs and cats, right? Maybe chickens too.
Precisely. Dogs are thought to have initially been drawn to human camps as scavengers, while cats were attracted to rodent populations around early farming settlements. Chickens might also fit this pathway. It suggests a degree of animal self-domestication in the very early stages before explicit human control really took over.
Okay, pathway number one. They came to us. What's the second pathway?
That's the prey pathway. This dynamic emerged with species that humans primarily hunted for food. As human populations grew and hunting pressure increased, potentially depleting wild stocks, humans began to manage these hunted populations more actively.
So managing them to ensure a steady supply, like instead of just hunting them to extinction, we started farming them.
Essentially, yes. It likely started with simple conservation measures, like selective hunting, perhaps sparing females or young, and gradually evolved into more controlled herding, captive breeding, and management. The focus here was initially on them as a food source.
And this pathway gave us the big livestock animals, the ones we rely on for meat and stuff.
Correct. Key livestock species like cattle, sheep, goats, and pigs fit this model. We were hunting them, putting pressure on their wild populations, and then shifted towards managing them more directly to secure a reliable food supply.
Makes sense. Okay, third and final pathway.
The directed pathway. This involved a more deliberate and active effort by humans from the outset. Humans intentionally sought out and captured wild animals for specific resources or purposes, often unrelated to immediate food consumption in the way the prey pathway was.
So less about them coming to us or us hunting them for dinner, more about us needing them for a job. Like, hey, you, come pull this cart.
Exactly. Humans actively sought to control and manage these animals for things like transportation, labor, or specific materials from relatively early in the relationship. It was a more top-down, goal-oriented approach from the human side.
And that pathway brought us animals like horses and camels, right? The heavy lifters and movers.
Yes, species like horses, donkeys, and camels are prime examples. These often involved overcoming significant wild behaviors and required imposing strong human control and training early on to adapt them for tasks like riding, pulling loads, or carrying goods.
Got it. So we've got animals who invited themselves because we were convenient, commensal, animals we hunted and then decided to manage more closely, prey, and animals we specifically went after for a job, directed. These different beginnings totally shaped the complex relationships we have with our domesticates today. It explains a lot of the variety.
They absolutely lay the foundation for the diverse behavioral and genetic outcomes we see. The nature of that initial human-animal interaction mattered immensely for the subsequent coevolutionary journey.
Now, this is where things get genuinely weird, maybe even a little fucked up. The material highlights something called the domestication syndrome. It's this bizarre pattern of traits that pops up consistently across totally different mammals that we domesticated, regardless of which pathway they came from. It's like a signature.
It is one of the most striking and unexpected phenomena of domestication. This suite of traits appears in domesticated dogs, cats, cattle, pigs, horses, sheep, goats, even things like domesticated foxes from experimental studies. It's this common signature imprinted on them by the process.
Okay, what are some of the key traits of this syndrome? The list is pretty strange, honestly.
Let's run through the usual suspects. A primary one, and essential, is increased docility and tameness. Domesticates are typically less fearful, less aggressive towards humans than their wild ancestors. That's a pretty obvious requirement for living close to us.
Makes sense. You need animals you can actually live with and manage without getting mauled.
Right. Then you see a host of physical changes that are less intuitive but highly correlated. Coat color changes are really common things like depigmentation leading to white patches or overall lighter coloring, sometimes complete albinism or piebald patterns.
Flocky ears and weird tails, too. Like, that seems totally random, but it's there across the board in so many species.
Absolutely. Changes in ear and tail form are characteristic floppy ears instead of upright ones, or tails that are curled, shortened, or oddly shaped compared to their wild counterparts. You see it again and again.
And their teeth and skulls change. They get, like, baby faces.
Yeah, domesticates often show reduced tooth size and alterations in craniofacial morphology, meaning changes to the shape of the skull and face, like shorter muzzles. Sometimes a more juvenile-looking head shape persists.
Reduced brain size is on the list as well, isn't it? That feels significant. Kind of insulting, almost.
It is. Reduced brain size, sometimes overall, sometimes specific regions compared to wild relatives, is consistently found in domesticates. The functional implications are still debated, but the anatomical change is clear.
Reproductive changes. They breed more.
Often, yes. Domesticates frequently have altered reproductive cycles. Many breed more frequently or are fertile year-round rather than seasonally like their wild ancestors. This was obviously a key trait selected for by humans wanting to increase production.
And finally, something called neoteny, acting like kids forever.
Prolonged juvenile behavior, or neoteny. This means retaining traits typical of young animals into adulthood, things like playfulness, maybe certain vocalizations that sound like juvenile begging, or even some physical features that we perceive as more cute or childlike.
So summing it up, you get animals that are tamer, often have weird patchy coats, floppy ears, curly tails, smaller teeth, smaller brains, breed like crazy, and acts kind of like perpetual kids. And this collection of weirdness shows up in animals as different as a wolf-descended dog, a wild boar-descended pig, and a wild horse-descended horse. How the hell does that happen? What ties all that together?
That's the million-dollar question, and the material points to a leading hypothesis, the neural crest cell NCC hypothesis.
All right, break down this NCC thing for us. What are these cells, and why are they supposedly the key to this whole syndrome?
Okay, think of neural crest cells as these incredibly versatile migratory cells that arise really early in embryonic development. They're kind of like stem cells on the move. They migrate to various parts of the developing embryo and give rise to a remarkably diverse set of tissues and cell types.
Like what kinds of tissues? What do they build?
They contribute to things like the bones and cartilage of the skull and face, the pigment cells in the skin and hair, melanocytes, the adrenal glands, specifically the medulla, which produces adrenaline and is crucial for the stress response and parts of the peripheral nervous system. They're involved in a lot of fundamental developmental processes.
Got it. Super important. Multitasking embryonic cells. So what does this hypothesis say about how they relate to domestication and this weird syndrome?
The theory is that the domestication syndrome arises primarily from mild disruptions or alterations deficits, maybe in the development or migration of these neural crest cells during the embryonic stage.
And why would domestication cause that specific disruption?
The leading idea connects it directly back to that primary selection pressure, tameness. The early and intense selection for tameness, that core requirement of making animals less fearful and aggressive towards humans, inadvertently targeted genes or genetic pathways that influence NCC development or migration.
So by picking the nicer, less jumpy animals to breed, generation after generation, we were accidentally selecting for subtle changes in the cells that build their stress glands, influence their brain development, create their pigment patterns, and form their faces and ears. All at once.
That's the core idea. Because NCCs are involved in forming such a wide range of structures, a single strong selective pressure, the pressure for tameness and reduced fear stress response, could have what biologists call pleiotropic effects. It means one genetic change affects multiple seemingly unrelated traits, so it could, as a side effect of influencing NCCs, simultaneously impact things like adrenal size, affecting stress levels, melanocyte migration, affecting coat color, craniofacial development, skull shape, ears, and even parts of the brain linked to behavior.
So the floppy ears, the white patches, the smaller brains. These weren't necessarily things humans were consciously trying to breed for, at least not initially. They just kind of came along for the ride because we were so focused on selecting for tameness.
Exactly. They're thought to be ride-along or correlated traits, byproducts of selecting for reduced fear and aggression, which plausibly links back to changes in NCC development. It offers a really compelling developmental explanation for why this bizarre suite of traits shows up together across such different species. It's a plausible biological mechanism linking the primary behavioral target of domestication, tameness, to these diverse physical changes.
And do the different pathways to domestication, commensal, prey, directed, influence how the syndrome manifests? Or is it the same across the board?
The material suggests they might influence the intensity and perhaps some specific outcomes. Animals on the commensal pathway, like dogs, might have undergone more gradual selection driven initially by their own inclination to associate with humans, maybe a less intense bottom-up pressure initially before humans really took the reins.
While prey and directed pathways were more direct, more top-down from the start.
Precisely. Animals on the prey pathway faced increasingly strong human management over time, while those on the directed pathway were subjected to immediate and intense human control and selection from the start. This difference in the nature and intensity of the initial selective pressure could help explain why even within domesticates there are differences, for example, why dogs develop such exceptional socio-cognitive skills for interacting with us, while some livestock species still retain stronger flight responses compared to dogs. The pathway matters.
Okay, so domestication wasn't just some simple agricultural innovation. The material makes a really strong case that it was a fundamental co-evolutionary revolution that utterly transformed human history, like completely altered our trajectory.
It's hard to overstate the impact. These partnerships fundamentally reshaped human economies, enabled entirely new forms of warfare and transportation, and were absolutely crucial in the shift from small, mobile hunter-gatherer groups to massive, settled agricultural societies, and eventually to the complex states and empires that define human civilization for millennia. This shit profoundly bitch-slapped human history and redirected its course. Seriously.
What were the biggest payoffs for humans? What did we get out of this deal?
The biggest benefits were reliable, manageable sources of essential resources, high-quality protein from meat, milk, and eggs, fibers for clothing and shelter from wool and hides, but critically, incredibly powerful sources of labor. Think about animals pulling plows, turning mills, carrying burdens, or transporting people across vast distances.
The original horsepower was literal horsepower.
Yeah.
And ox power, donkey power.
Absolutely. This combination of increased food security and dramatically enhanced productive capacity allowed human populations to grow larger, become more sedentary, and develop far more complex social structures. Things like specialization of labor, social hierarchies, and permanent settlements became possible when not everyone was scrambling for the next meal. The domestication of animals like cattle, in particular, is intrinsically linked to the rise of early civilizations, providing a mobile, high-energy food source that fostered stability and allowed knowledge and wealth to accumulate in one place.
But this incredibly close relationship had a dark side, didn't it? A major downside that still impacts us today, something we're still dealing with.
A very serious one. The flip side of living in much closer proximity and higher density with large numbers of domesticated animals was creating unprecedented opportunities for pathogens to jump the species barrier. This led directly to the explosion of zoonotic diseases, infectious illnesses that originated in animals and spilled over into human populations. Think measles, tuberculosis, smallpox, influenza. Many have links to livestock.
Which is a stark reminder that even broadly beneficial mutualistic processes can have complex negative consequences. It's not always sunshine and rainbows.
Exactly. It highlights the nuanced nature of these co-evolutionary relationships. They aren't always simple win-wins across the board or without serious trade-offs. It also kicked off a new kind of co-evolutionary dynamic, an arms race between humans, our domesticates, and the pathogens that can infect both. This ongoing struggle continues to shape global health today.
Okay, with all that background, let's dive deep into perhaps the most famous example of this whole damn story: humans and dogs. Our original ride or dies, our oldest friends.
Dogs hold a unique place, absolutely. They were our first animal allies, and their co-evolutionary journey began thousands of years before we even figured out agriculture. This incredibly long shared history forged a bond that has profoundly shaped both species in remarkable ways.
And the timeline is still debated, but we're talking way back, right? Like Ice Age back.
Way back. Genetic and archaeological evidence firmly establishes dogs as the first domesticated species, emerging from an ancestral wolf population. The consensus timeline often sits around 15,000 to 17,000 years ago, potentially coinciding with human dispersal into new territories. But some compelling evidence pushes the possibility back even further, maybe as much as 40,000 years ago. It's ancient.
So this relationship was cemented long before we were farmers. The reasons weren't about plowing fields or providing milk or wool. It was something else entirely.
Exactly. The initial drivers were fundamentally different from livestock. They were likely centered on mutual benefits related to hunting assistance, protection for humans, and access to reliable food and safety for the early canids associating with us.
And the link to wolves. They came from wolves but aren't wolves anymore. How did that split happen?
Modern dogs and gray wolves share a common, now extinct, prehistoric wolf ancestor. The debate isn't whether they're related, but how the split happened. Was it humans actively taming wolf pups from dens? Or, as the commensal pathway suggests, were bolder, less fearful wolves drawn to human camps? Perhaps scavenging, and over time, those more tolerant individuals gradually evolved into something new alongside us. Either way, that wolf ancestry provides the raw material that human selection then molded into the incredible diversity of dogs we see today.
So the original contract was truly a win-win. Both sides got something valuable out of it from the start.
It seems so, based on the available evidence. For humans, the benefits were huge. Invaluable assistance in hunting tracking game over long distances, flushing prey from cover, cornering large animals, and protection, with their keen senses alerting humans to the presence of predators or rival human groups, an early warning system.
And what were the early dogs getting out of the deal? Why hang around messy humans?
They gain a more reliable food supply, scavenging scraps from human kills and camps. Far easier than taking down big game alone. They got warmth and shelter from human fires and settlements. And being part of a human hunting group likely reduced their own risk when tackling larger, dangerous prey. The humans with their weapons would handle the final, riskiest confrontation. Safety in numbers, and with better tools.
This leads to that wild theory by anthropologist Pat Shipman that's been circulating. This idea that this ancient human-wolf partnership might have given Homo sapiens a major competitive edge over other hominins, like the Neanderthals.
It's a compelling and provocative idea, yeah. Shipman suggests that the combined capabilities of human hunting strategies or planning, our projectile weapons and canine senses, stamina, and ability to track prey created a synergistic effect. It made Homo sapiens significantly more efficient hunters, particularly of large game, compared to Neanderthals, who lacked such animal partners.
So maybe it wasn't just about adapting to each other. Maybe this partnership was pivotal in our own success as a species, helping us outcompete rivals.
That's the implication. If this partnership made us more successful at acquiring resources in competitive environments, it could have contributed significantly to the ecological expansion and success of Homo sapiens, perhaps even playing a role in the eventual decline of Neanderthal populations. It elevates the human-dog bond from just a neat evolutionary story to something potentially world-changing for our species' history.
That's just wild to think about. And the fact that this bond was forged before agriculture is key.
Yeah.
Right? It wasn't about utility for farming. It was something more fundamental, like cooperation and social connection.
Absolutely crucial point. The pre-agricultural context meant the primary selective pressures shaping this early partnership were social and cooperative. Humans weren't breeding dogs for specific physical tasks like pulling carts yet. They were selecting, maybe unconsciously at first, for animals that could integrate into a human social group, communicate effectively across species lines, and cooperate in complex activities like hunting. This early, sustained focus on interspecies social bonding and cooperation created a unique, selective environment that likely fostered the remarkable sociocognitive adaptations we see in dogs today, their incredible ability to read human social cues, understand our intentions, and form deep emotional bonds.
And speaking of that bonding, one of the absolute coolest things highlighted in the material is the neurochemistry of it. Why dogs just seem to understand us on this deep, almost intuitive level. It's not just in our heads.
It's genuinely mind-blowing research. It turns out dogs have evolved to tap into and utilize a fundamental mammalian bonding pathway that's also crucial for human social connection. They share a neurochemical mechanism with us. It's quite remarkable.
Tell us about the research on that. What exactly is happening in their brains and ours?
Studies have shown that when humans and dogs interact in positive ways, things like making eye contact, gentle petting, or even just talking in a calm, affectionate voice, there's a measurable surge in the hormone oxytocin. Not just in the human, which you might expect, but crucially in the dog as well. It's reciprocal.
Oxytocin, that's the so-called love hormone or bonding hormone linked to trust, maternal care, social recognition, all that good stuff.
That's the one. It's a key player in forming and maintaining social bonds across mammals. And the remarkable finding is that this reciprocal oxytocin release, the surge happening in both species during interaction, doesn't occur when humans interact with hand-raised wolves in the same way. This strongly suggests it's a specific adaptation that evolved in the dog lineage during their long co-evolutionary journey with humans. Wolves just don't seem to have that same response to us.
So dogs aren't just incidentally triggering our oxytocin. They've evolved to have their own oxytocin system respond to us, reinforcing the bond from both sides, like a biological feedback loop of affection.
That appears to be the case. It creates this beautiful positive feedback loop. Positive interaction leads to oxytocin release in both human and dog, which enhances feelings of trust and bonding, which makes both species want more positive interaction. It strengthens the connection over time.
And the parallel to human mother-infant bonding is just wild, using the same basic system.
It is strikingly similar that this ancient partnership between two vastly different species utilizes a neural pathway so fundamental to mammalian social bonding, suggests a truly deep, perhaps even co-opted mechanism for interspecies connection. It's like the species boundary gets physiologically blurred in the context of this bond. It's a biological love story playing out at the hormonal level, basically.
And the experiments where they actually gave dogs oxytocin, what did that show?
Researchers have given dogs synthetic oxytocin, often via nasal spray. They found that dogs, particularly female dogs, increased the amount of time they spent gazing into their owner's eyes after receiving the oxytocin. This indicates a heightened sensitivity to the hormone and suggests it promotes human-directed affiliative behavior, like seeking connection through eye contact.
And compare that eye gaze behavior to wolves.
Yeah.
It's night and day, right?
It's a massive behavioral divergence created by domestication. In wild wolves, prolonged direct eye contact is typically perceived as a challenge or a threat signal. It's confrontational. But dogs, under human selection, have transformed this into a powerful affiliative bonding signal. They actively seek out and use eye gaze to connect with us, communicate, solicit attention or affection. It's a fundamental shift in meaning.
This neurochemical and behavioral divergence shows a truly profound co-evolutionary adaptation. They've essentially evolved to tap into, or we've perhaps unintentionally selected for their ability to tap into, These fundamental mammalian bonding pathways to connect with us.
It's not just learned behavior, it seems to be wired in at a deeper level. Their brains and hormonal systems have evolved over millennia to facilitate that incredibly deep connection we feel with them, and they presumably feel with us.
Okay, so dogs have changed dramatically to bond with us and integrate into our lives. But this is coevolution. It's a two-way street. How did we change in response to living so closely with dogs for tens of thousands of years?
Well, on the dog side, the effects of human selection are screamingly obvious. For millennia, humans have been an incredibly potent selective force, leading to the astonishing morphological and behavioral diversity we see across dog breeds today. It's artificial selection gone wild.
From a tiny Chihuahua to a massive Great Dane, from a sheepdog obsessively hurting things to a lapdog content on the couch.
Yeah.
That's all human selection tinkering with that wolf ancestry.
Absolutely. Beyond just physical appearance, we've selected for specific behaviors and traits, increased tameness, reduced aggression compared to wolves, the retention of juvenile characteristics, neoteny, and specialized abilities for different tasks. Herding, guarding, hunting specific prey, retrieval, scent detection, and increasingly just companionship. Think about Roman farmers breeding shepherd dogs white so they wouldn't be confused with wolves attacking livestock at night, or deliberately breeding farm dogs black to distinguish them from brown bears threatening the farm. It wasn't just aesthetics, it was utility and distinction, driven by human needs.
What about the human side? It feels harder to point to direct genetic changes in humans specifically because of dogs compared to something like lactase persistence in cattle. Is there any evidence for that?
That's right. Direct, clear-cut genetic adaptations in humans solely driven by dog interaction are less obvious than LP, or at least harder to prove definitively. However, the cultural and cognitive adaptations on the human side are incredibly profound and undeniable.
Like learning to read their cues. We get pretty good at understanding what a dog is thinking or feeling, don't we?
Precisely. We've developed a remarkably sophisticated ability to read and interpret canine body language, vocalizations, facial expressions, and subtle behavioral cues. Think about how quickly most people can tell if a dog is happy, scared, stressed, or about to snap, often with just a glance at their posture, tail position, or ear set. This level of interspecies communication requires significant human learning and cognitive adaptation passed down culturally.
And the emotional bonds. We don't just use them, we love them.
The deep emotional attachments we form, treating dogs as full members of the family, even calling ourselves dog parents, this isn't just utilitarian. It speaks to a deep capacity for interspecies connection and empathy that is fostered, maybe even selected for, by this long relationship.
And the material suggests that the capacity for this deep interspecies empathy and communication might actually be something that co-evolved, that we got better at understanding them as they got better at understanding us.
That's a fascinating argument. If dogs have co-evolved an enhanced ability to read our communicative signals and emotional states, which the oxytocin and gaze research suggests they have, it stands to reason that a reciprocal process likely occurred. Over tens of thousands of years, those early humans who were better able to read and respond appropriately to canine cues would have been more successful partners, both in cooperative hunting and in simply coexisting safely day to day. This ongoing feedback loop could have selected for, or at least strongly favored, the development and cultural transmission of the human capacity for profound interspecies empathy and sophisticated communication with dogs. It created a smoother, more effective partnership built on mutual understanding.
Incredible. The OG partnership shaping not just dogs, but maybe even our own cognitive and emotional landscape. Okay, from our ancient hunting buddies, let's pivot to the animals that were the engine of civilization. Livestock. Very different relationship.
Completely different but equally transformative chapter in human-animal coevolution. Beginning around 10,000 to 12,000 years ago with the Neolithic agricultural revolution, it kicked off a set of relationships centered less on hunting partners and more on animals as controllable resources, living property, essentially.
And their impact on human history is just monumental, hard to overstate.
Absolutely monumental. They became living larders and mobile labor forces. They provided reliable, manageable sources of high-quality protein meat, milk, eggs, and essential materials like hides and wool for clothing and tools. But crucially, as we touched on, they provided draft power on an unprecedented scale.
Pulling plows, enabling larger fields, heavier loads, basically amplifying human labor massively.
Exactly. This capacity for animal-powered labor, combined with the reliable food source, supported dramatically larger and denser human populations. It enabled sedentary life on a grand scale, leading to permanent settlements, the accumulation of surplus resources, and the development of complex social and political structures, villages, towns, cities, states, empires that paved the way for civilization as we know it. The material highlights how species like cattle are intimately linked to the rise of human civilizations, precisely because they offered a mobile, high-energy food source and labor that fostered community stability and allowed for the growth of settled, complex societies.
And this brings us back to that prime example of human genetic coevolution we discussed earlier, lactase persistence. Our own bodies changing because of cows.
It is arguably the most compelling, widely cited case of a specific genetic adaptation in humans driven directly by the domestication of an animal. As we mentioned, lactase is the enzyme needed to digest the milk sugar, lactose. In most mammals and our ancestors, production wanes significantly after weaning.
But in populations that started dairying, kept milking those cows, goats, sheep.
A genetic mutation arose that kept the lactase gene on throughout adulthood. This mutation, or rather a suite of different mutations, allowing lactase persistence, LP, evolved independently in several different dairying populations across the globe. We see it pop up in Northern Europe, parts of the Middle East, and various regions in Africa, all within the last 10,000 years, coinciding with the spread of dairy farming.
Different mutations doing the same job in different places. That's powerful evidence it was driven by a common selective pressure, right? Convergent evolution.
Incredibly powerful evidence. The fact that different genetic changes conferring LP arose and spread rapidly in different human populations alongside the cultural practice of dairy farming is smoking gun evidence of strong positive selection driven by the huge selective advantage of being able to digest unprocessed milk. In the European case, a specific mutation located near the lactase gene spread astonishingly rapidly across the continent in just a few thousand years.
Why so fast? What made it such a huge evolutionary win?
The material points to significant fitness benefits. Being able to consume fresh milk provided a reliable source of calories, protein, fat, and essential nutrients, which could be a lifesaver, especially in times of famine or seasonal food scarcity. It buffered against crop failures. Some hypotheses also link LP to potential benefits in calcium absorption or vitamin D synthesis, which might have been particularly advantageous in higher latitudes with less sunlight, perhaps even improving bone health and aiding childbirth outcomes for women.
So the ability to digest milk was a major evolutionary advantage for humans in these dairying cultures. And this is the gene culture loop in action again, crystal clear.
Absolutely. The cultural practice of dairying created the novel selective environment. Humans with the LP mutation thrived in this environment because they could exploit this new, rich food source more efficiently, leading to better survival and reproduction, strong positive selection for those genes. And then the increasing prevalence of LP in the population made dairying an even more successful and essential subsistence strategy, reinforcing the cultural practice. It's a textbook example of that gene culture feedback loop driving rapid human evolution.
It's pretty mind-blowing that our DNA was fundamentally changed by something we started doing with cows, sheep, and goats. That culture literally reshaped our genes.
It really underscores how potent human culture can be as an evolutionary force, capable of creating selective pressure strong enough to drive rapid genetic change in ourselves. However, it's also worth noting, as the material does, that LP wasn't the only way humans adapted to milk. Many early dairying cultures developed methods to process milk into cheese, yogurt, or fermented products like kefir.
Which reduces the lactose content, making it easier to digest even without the enzyme.
Exactly. These cultural adaptations, food processing techniques allowed people to gain nutritional benefits from dairy products even without widespread genetic LP. This highlights our flexibility and the complexity of the gene-culture interaction. Sometimes culture paves the way for genetic change, sometimes it offers an alternative solution, and often they co-evolve alongside each other. The exception case mentioned, like traditional Mongolian herders with low LP rates despite high dairy consumption but relying heavily on fermented mare's milk, airrag, further illustrates that cultural buffering can sometimes decouple the selective pressure from the genetic outcome.
So we changed genetically because of livestock. But they obviously changed profoundly too, not just getting those general domestication syndrome traits we talked about. Humans really went to town on them.
Oh, absolutely. Livestock were subjected to intense and increasingly directed selection by humans for a vast array of specific traits beyond just tameness. This was less about them adapting to us generally, and more about us molding them to fit our increasingly specific needs and desires.
like breeding cows specifically for insane milk production, or sheep for maximum wool quantity and quality, or pigs that grow super fast.
Precisely. Humans bred different agrotypes or specialized breeds for particular purposes. In cattle, we selected for things like temperament, coat color, horn size, or lack thereof, but also incredibly high milk yields in dairy breeds, rapid growth and muscle mass in beef breeds, or sheer strength and endurance for draft work. Sheep were initially primarily for meat, but selection later focused intensely on wool quality, staple length, and quantity, and in some areas, milk production. Goats were selected for high milk yields, meat production, or fiber like cashmere or mohair. Pigs for rapid growth, large litter sizes, specific fat-to-meat ratios, and efficient conversion of feed to meat.
And the selection process intensified dramatically over time, especially with modern breeding science and genetics.
Exponentially. Over millennia, and especially in the last couple of centuries with systematic breeding programs and now genomics, humans became an almost unprecedentedly powerful selective force. We became capable of making incredibly rapid, far-reaching genetic and phenotypic changes in these animals to maximize their productivity exactly to our specifications. It was about maximizing mutual benefits, sure, but the direction and intensity were heavily, heavily human-driven.
Okay, we've covered the giants, dogs, and livestock, the big players. But this story of human-animal coevolution includes other fascinating players, like cats and horses, and even some truly unexpected wild relationships that aren't about domestication at all.
These other examples really fleshed out the incredible diversity and complexity of this story. Take cats, our feline co-inhabitants. A very different vibe from dogs or cows.
Right, from useful pest controllers to our spoiled couch potato overlords. Their relationship also goes back about 10,000 years, right? Around the time agriculture got started.
Roughly, yes, likely originating in the Fertile Crescent alongside early agriculture. Their pathway to domestication seems to have been classic commensal. They were drawn to early human settlements because of the rodents attracted to our grain storage. Humans tolerated them, maybe even encouraged them slightly, because they provided excellent free pest control. The cats got a reliable food source in a new niche we inadvertently created.
So the early benefits were pretty straightforward and transactional. Rodent control for us, easy prey for them. Not a deep working partnership like with dogs.
Exactly. Genetic studies suggest some early shifts in genes related to things like reward-seeking behavior, memory, and perhaps fear responses in cats under human association, but they didn't undergo the same radical transformation in morphology or behavior as dogs or livestock.
That's why some people argue they're only semi-domesticated, right? Because they retain so many wild traits, that independence, that hunting instinct.
That's the argument. Compared to dogs or livestock, cats retain much more of their ancestral independence, hunting instinct, and often a less overtly dependent social structure with humans. This likely reflects a less intense, less directed form of early human selection. Humans weren't actively breeding them for specific tasks like pulling plows or complex cooperation in hunting. They were primarily tolerated, maybe valued, for their pest control services. The selection pressure was different, less pervasive.
But their role has totally shifted in modern times, at least in many cultures. They're not just mousers anymore.
Dramatically. While pest control is still a recognized benefit in some contexts, like the famous Chief Mouser to the Cabinet Office at Downing Street in the UK, which is a real job title, their primary value in many parts of the world has shifted almost entirely to companionship, stress reduction, and emotional support. This is a major culturally driven shift in the co-evolutionary dynamic. And modern selection, particularly through the development of specific breeds, is now focusing much more on aesthetics, coat color length, face shape, and personality traits, friendliness, calmness, suited for companionship.
Interesting. Okay, what about horses? They feel like another absolute game changer in human history.
Absolutely transformative. The domestication of horses originating on the Eurasian steppes roughly 4,000 to 6,000 years ago profoundly altered transportation, agriculture, communication networks, and perhaps most dramatically, warfare. They were an absolute game changer for the trajectory of human history.
Initially, like some livestock, maybe hunted or even milked before we figured out how to ride them.
Yes. Early interactions might have involved hunting for meat or possibly milking mare herds, similar to how other herbivores were managed, before their incredible potential for riding and labor was fully recognized and exploited.
And the real revolution came with riding. That changed everything.
Precisely. The ability to ride horses, which evidence suggests emerged around 3,500, 3000 BC, maybe earlier, dramatically increased human mobility. This facilitated long-distance trade, allowed for faster communication across empires, enabled large-scale migrations and conquests, and completely revolutionized warfare with the advent of cavalry, fast, mobile striking forces.
And then they became essential horsepower for labor, too, not just for war and travel.
Exactly. Essential labor for plowing larger fields more efficiently, transporting goods and people overland far faster and greater quantities than before. This accelerated economic development and enabled the expansion and maintenance of vast empires across continents. Consequently, humans exerted strong, directed, selective pressures on horses, breeding them for specific traits like speed, strength, endurance, intelligence, temperament suitable for training, and specialized gaits suited for different tasks, like riding comfortably, pulling heavy loads, or racing.
And the relationship went beyond just utility. The material talks about centaurability. What's that about?
That concept, centaurability, tries to capture the profound sense of physical and mental synchrony experienced by skilled riders, the almost uncanny feeling of the horse and rider acting as a single, coordinated entity. It speaks to a deep, embodied understanding and connection that reflects a profound level of co-evolved behavioral and cognitive integration, forged through shared movement, trust, and intention over millennia. It's more than just sitting on an animal.
And like cats, their role has changed with technology, but the bond remains incredibly strong for many people.
Yes. With the advent of mechanized transport and agriculture in the 20th century, the utilitarian role of horses diminished significantly in many parts of the world. But they remain hugely important for sport, recreation, therapy, and companionship. The emotional bond is still central for millions, and modern selection continues to adapt breeds for these contemporary roles, favoring temperament, athleticism, and physical traits suited for leisure and competition rather than just brute strength or endurance for labor or war.
Comparing cats and horses really shows that spectrum of how humans interact with and select animals, doesn't it?
It does, beautifully. Cats, with their probable commensal origins and less directed early selection, show less dramatic changes from their wild ancestors and retain more independence. Horses, subjected to intensive, directed selection for complex tasks and deep integration into human society and warfare, underwent more profound transformations and became deeply interwoven into the very fabric of human civilization for centuries. The specific trajectory of coevolution is highly contingent on the initial conditions and the nature and intensity of the human selective pressures. But human perception and changing cultural values, like valuing cats primarily as companions now, also co-evolve and continue to influence these animal partners.
Okay, we've covered domestication pathways and some huge examples, but the material includes a truly remarkable wildcard example of a deep human-animal mutualism that exists without domestication. Humans and the honey-guide bird in Africa. This sounds wild.
This is one of the most incredible and frankly bizarre examples of a complex interspecies partnership found anywhere on Earth. It occurs in parts of sub-Saharan Africa between a specific bird species, the greater honey guide, and human honey hunters, particularly groups like the Boran people in East Africa or the Hadza hunter-gatherers in Tanzania.
What's the setup here? How does this work? It's like the bird and the human are partners in crime for honey.
Exactly. It's a beautiful example of evolved asymmetry leading to cooperation. The honey guide bird is incredibly good at finding wild bees' nests, which are often hidden high up in trees or inside rocky outcrops. They have a real knack for it. But the bird itself can't easily access the most valuable parts inside the beeswax and the protein-rich larvae because the nest is too well protected by stinging bees and they can't break it open. Humans, on the other hand, have the tools, like axes and the techniques, often using smoke to pacify the bees, to open the nests and harvest the honey, but they can spend a huge amount of time and effort just searching for those hidden nests in the first place. Finding them is the hard part for humans.
So the bird knows where the honey is, the human knows how to get into the hive. Perfect match made in evolutionary heaven.
A perfect setup for mutualism. The bird actively finds a human and leads them, often over considerable distances, directly to the nest. The human then uses their skills to subdue bees and break open the hive to harvest the honey and comb. And crucially, the human usually leaves behind some of the beeswax and larvae, which the bird then gets to feast on. The bird gets its share of the spoils, especially the beeswax, which it has special gut microbes to digest, along with any leftover grubs.
A clear mutual benefit. With neither species being domesticated by the other, the bird is totally wild.
Precisely. Studies on the Boran people show that when they follow a honey guide, they find bees' nests much, much faster and more efficiently. One study cited found it reduced their average search time by up to 2/3, or about 64%. That's a huge payoff for the humans. The bird, in return, gets access to a high-calorie, reliable food resource, wax and larvae, that it would struggle to access or access far less frequently on its own. It's a complex, cooperative interaction with a completely free-living wild animal.
And it relies on incredibly sophisticated communication between two totally different species, a bird and a mammal. How does that even work?
It absolutely does. It's a two-way communication system that has undoubtedly co-evolved over a very long time, possibly hundreds of thousands of years. The interaction often begins with the bird actively seeking out humans and using specific, distinct behaviors and vocalizations to get their attention and signal its intent to guide.
Like a specific call. Hey human, follow me, I found honey.
Pretty much. The honey guide has a particular call, often described scientifically as a victor sound or a distinctive rattling chatter, that it uses specifically to attract humans, or, interestingly, honey badgers, another animal they sometimes cooperate with. Once it has a human's attention, it flies ahead, short distances at a time, perching conspicuously and calling, waiting for the human to catch up and follow.
And the humans respond. They have a way to talk back to the bird.
Yes. Crucially, humans use culturally specific signals to show the bird they're following and to maintain the interaction. The Boran, for example, use a distinct loud whistle, the fulido, which researchers found significantly increases the chances of the bird successfully guiding them to a nest. It's thought to encourage the bird and signal, yes, I'm coming. The bird then flies on, perches, waits, calls again. Humans can often infer how far away the nest is by the bird's flight patterns or perch height. When they arrive at the nest location, the bird often goes silent or perches very close to the entrance. It's an intricate dialogue built on learned signals and likely evolved responses on both sides.
This highlights the gene-culture coevolution again, doesn't it? The bird's genetics for guiding and recognizing signals meets human cultural knowledge about how to follow and respond.
Absolutely. The bird's behavior, its calls, its guiding flight pattern, its ability to assess human response is likely shaped by a combination of genetic predisposition and individual learning. But the human side relies heavily on cultural transmission. The knowledge of how to recognize the honey guide's specific call, how to understand its guiding behavior, how to use the correct human response signals, like the fulido whistle, and of course the complex techniques for safely accessing the hive, all this knowledge is passed down through generations culturally within these communities. The bird's guiding strategy depends on there being reliable humans who understand the signals and are willing to cooperate. And the human practice depends on the bird's reliable guiding behavior. They depend on each other.
And there's even a cultural belief among some groups that helps maintain this relationship, like don't piss off the bird.
Yes, among some honey hunting communities, like the Yao in Mozambique, there's a strong cultural belief that if you take all the honey and comb and don't deliberately leave a share for the honey guide, the bird will retaliate during the next guiding session. The belief is it might lead you to something dangerous, like a venomous snake, a lion, or just on a wild goose chase instead of a bee's nest next time. While the literal truth of the bird's conscious vengefulness is debatable from a scientific perspective, this cultural belief acts as a powerful social mechanism to enforce reciprocity. It underscores a cultural understanding that this is a partnership based on fairness and exchange, and that upholding your end of the bargain is essential to keep this fragile, ancient system functioning. It promotes cooperation.
It's a beautiful, complex, and maybe somewhat fragile relationship then, dependent on culture and trust.
It truly is. Highly specialized mutualisms like this are often vulnerable. Changes in the environment affecting bee populations or the availability of nesting sites, or perhaps more significantly, the decline of traditional honey hunting practices due to modernization, changing economies, or cultural shifts, could jeopardize this ancient, co-evolved partnership. It's a poignant example of how intertwined destinies, while powerful and fascinating, can also be fragile in the face of rapid environmental and social change.
So we've explored a whole spectrum here.
Yeah.
From domesticated partners, fundamentally reshaped by our influence living in our homes, to a wild bird we have this sophisticated mutualistic dialogue with out in the bush. Pulling it all together, what's the big picture? What does this incredible tapestry of human-animal coevolution tell us about ourselves and our place in the world?
I think it tells us that the history of humanity cannot possibly be understood in isolation from the history of the animals we've shared the planet with. The sheer range of stories, from the deepest biological integration with dogs and livestock, driving changes in our own genes, to the highly specialized cultural partnership with the honey guide, reveals a richness and complexity that most people simply don't grasp. Our history is their history too, and vice versa.
And that interplay of genes and culture is really at the heart of it for humans, isn't it? That seems to be the thread running through all these human examples.
It absolutely is the defining feature of human-animal coevolution. The unique human capacity for culture, for rapid learning, innovation, complex social organization, and flexible transmission of knowledge and practices across generations acts as this incredibly potent, fast-acting selective force. It accelerates and redirects coevolutionary paths in ways that aren't typical in the rest of nature. Culture adds this whole other layer, this turbocharger, to the process.
So our social structures, our technology, our ability to manipulate the environment through things like farming and building cities, that makes us an exceptionally powerful co-evolutionary partner, maybe the most powerful one out there.
Unquestionably. Through things like agriculture, building settlements, which is a form of niche construction, and especially through the deliberate application of artificial selection and breeding, humans have become one of the most significant evolutionary forces acting on the planet. We became capable of directing the evolution of other species to an unprecedented degree, often driven initially by our own niche construction. We change the environment, animals adapt to our new environment, and then we adapt to their presence and behaviors, setting off that reciprocal dance.
And despite the varied origins and specific relationships, dogs, cows, cats, horses, there's a broad convergent trend across domestication, right? You see similar things happening again and again.
There is. Across many domesticated mammals, regardless of their specific starting pathway, we see that consistent trend towards increased docility, tameness, reduced aggression towards humans, and often enhanced social tolerance, and even social bonding capabilities with humans. It suggests that simply living in close proximity to humans, who actively or passively favored individuals that were less fearful and aggressive, created a common, powerful selective pressure leading to these convergent behavioral outcomes. Being nice to humans paid off evolutionarily.
And this isn't just ancient history we're talking about. This story is still unfolding right now.
It is fundamentally a dynamic, ongoing process. These relationships aren't static historical artifacts. They continue to evolve in response to our rapidly changing world. Think about intensive modern agriculture, massive urbanization, globalization connecting everything. Cities, for instance, create entirely novel ecological niches that drive new adaptations in urban-dwelling animals like pigeons, rats, raccoons, even coyotes. The coevolution continues in these new arenas.
And modern breeding just takes that directed evolution and puts it into hyperdrive. We're shaping animals faster than ever.
Exactly. Modern selective breeding, now augmented with genomic tools, applies incredibly strong and precise artificial selective pressures, accelerating evolutionary change and domesticates far beyond what happened historically. The coevolutionary process is still happening, often at an intensified pace, adapting animals to our ever-changing needs, desires, and environments.
The impact of all this has been absolutely monumental, as we've discussed. Reshaping animals with that strange domestication syndrome, driving genetic change in our cells like lactase persistence, and fundamentally enabling the rise of agriculture, complex societies, and civilizations.
It provided the labor, food, materials, and mobility that powered human expansion and societal development on a scale that would likely have been impossible otherwise. We literally built civilizations on the backs of these animals.
But it's also come with significant trade-offs, a double-edged sword, as the material notes. It wasn't all positive.
Absolutely. While domesticates gain benefits like protection from predators and reliable food sources, they often suffer a significant loss of genetic diversity, become highly dependent on humans for survival, losing skills needed in the wild, and face substantial health and welfare challenges resulting from intensive management practices and selection for extreme traits, like rapid growth or high milk yield. And for humans, as we noted, the major downside has been the increased exposure to and emergence of devastating zoonotic diseases resulting from that close contact. Evolutionary fitness in this context becomes very specific to the human-created niche and involves complex trade-offs for both partners, raising questions about what success even means.
Which naturally raises serious ethical questions and highlights the conservation complexities inherent in these profoundly intertwined destinies. When you realize just how much we've shaped these animals down to their genes and brains, it forces you to consider the responsibilities that come with that immense power.
It absolutely does. Understanding this deep coevolutionary history is not just about understanding the past, it's crucial for informing our approach to conservation, animal welfare, public health, especially regarding zoonoses, and agricultural practices going forward. Our unprecedented capacity to shape other species brings with it significant ethical considerations about how we use that power responsibly.
So, to wrap this massive topic up, these co-evolutionary partnerships between humans and animals are genuinely among the most profound and transformative interspecies relationships on Earth. Full stop. They're a testament to how reciprocal influence, mutual needs, and, in our unique case, the power of cultural innovation can drive incredible changes in genetics, behavior, and culture for everyone involved.
And human culture, as we've seen, makes our role unique and incredibly powerful, accelerating things and establishing us as arguably the major evolutionary force shaping life on this planet right now.
Understanding this story is fundamental to understanding who we are and how we got here. It has massive implications for how we live with animals today, our pets, our livestock, the wildlife interacting with our world, and how we prepare for the future. Whether that's tackling the next pandemic, emerging from the human-animal interface, or making ethical choices about biotechnology and animal welfare.
Right. As human societies continue to evolve and our technological capacity to shape life itself expands at an exponential rate, our relationships with the animal kingdom will inevitably enter new, unprecedented phases. The lessons embedded in our shared co-evolutionary past the power of mutual benefit, the potential for unintended and sometimes devastating consequences, the dynamic interplay of biology and culture, and the inherent value woven into these deep connections provide critical guidance, or at least context, for navigating these future interactions more consciously and perhaps more responsibly.
The story is far from over. So here's a thought to leave you with, something to chew on. Given the extraordinary depth of our co-evolutionary history, are destinies with animals still fundamentally intertwined, even in this technological age? As technology allows us to manipulate genetics and relationships with increasing power, think gene editing, synthetic biology, how does this ancient, often messy history inform the ethical choices we face today about our animal partners and the broader web of life on Earth? Where the hell do we go next in this incredible ongoing shared journey?